You're good.
Okay, fantastic. Still waiting for viewers, so I don't have to say anything just yet. Okay, welcome aboard, people. People are starting to come in pretty quickly. We'll give them another couple of seconds for them to get on. Meanwhile, you can look at the lovely cover art I have for this deck, or not. Okay, let me close this so it's not a distraction. Okay, we're definitely getting there. Give just one more minute for the last couple of stragglers to come in, and then we'll jump right in. Okay, let's get started. You know, as always, the recording of this webinar will be posted live within a day or two of us actually completing it. I urge you to, if you're not on, you can't see it, but if you know someone who's not on the webinar, you know, please remind them they've got to go watch it. Feel free to come back and watch this again, or look at the deck. Either way is fine. This one is so important that even though you got the deck in advance, I'm going to actually go through it with you in real time. If you have questions or comments, feel free to throw it into the chat area. I may or may not be able to multitask well enough to incorporate it into the actual presentation. If I don't get to your question by the end of the deck, please raise your hand. We'll bring you forward and you can ask your question in person. As we go through this, you should really be thinking about, you know, how does this apply to my company? How is this going to help me raise my next round? And of course, everything that you see here, either you ask your questions at the end or you continue to think about it over the next couple of days, and it should go into the things that your company wants to talk about in your partner meetings next week to make sure that you're on the right track. Okay, so without further ado, let's jump right in. So I don't think I need to sell you on the need for investors. That's what we're all here for. The key takeaway from this is that ultimately you want, well, I wanted to get to the next page, pardon me. There we go. The key takeaway here for this particular session is that we want to show you how to get to 50 to 100 prospective investors. If you have fewer, you will stall. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've seen startups think they have a robust investor list. There are 20 of them, maybe. They go out there trying to raise money, and it's just not coming together for them. So you really do have to start with 50 to 20. And this has been a rule of thumb that I've used for many, many years. And it's actually hard data to come out over the years to support it. DocuSend had a study that came out a little less than a year ago where they tracked the decks that were opened and how long it took for that particular company to close its round. And they charted it on a graph, and the graph actually climbed very steeply until you hit, 50 investors, and then it started to get meaningful, and then it started to taper off, and you started hitting diminishing marginal returns around 100. So this is both strongly supported by anecdotal evidence, and there is actual hard data behind this number. So I'm going to start this. I normally give this live. I'm not actually going to make you raise your hand for this, but I want you to think about what fishing and fundraising have in common. So just take a moment and think about it. In your own mind, kind of compose the answer, pretend I'm calling on you, and now be thankful that I don't, because whatever you said would be absolutely wrong. There is nothing at all about fishing that is like raising money or prospecting for investors. You can't just put your money out there and wait for people to come and nibble on it. Nothing happens, right? And patience is not rewarded. You got to be really aggressive. You're going to be waiting a long time. And it is a team effort. It is not a one-person's job. The analogy I like to give is hunting. So apologies to anyone whose sensibility this offends, but it is the appropriate analogy here. When you're hunting and when you're reaching for investors, you need to track your prey. You need to have as much help as possible. You need to be super aggressive about it. So now, without further ado, I'm going to tell you how to prospect like a big game hunter. So the essence of building your prospect list is an iterative process. You start off with companies that are like yours in certain ways. And that could be in certain sectors. So for instance, let's say you are a marketplace for health experts. So there are marketplace companies that are similar to you, and there are health companies similar to you. And you already know a couple of them that are probably adjacent but not totally competitive to you. And that's a good place to start. So you're going to find out who invested in their early rounds, their seed or A rounds, depending on what you're raising. Then you're going to try to find out all the other investments that those investors have made. And then you're going to go back to those other companies and look for their investors. And as you repeat this process, you're going to come up with a long list of comparable companies on one side and potential investors on the other side. So let me dig into that a little bit to the nuts and bolts. So those of you who, you should automatically recognize this logo. This is AngelList. AngelList is, I'm not kidding, your new best friend. It is the single best place to find information on who's invested in what, especially when you're talking about angel rounds, but also when it comes to A rounds. I would also check out Crunchbase. Usually the data is the same, but occasionally you'll find a little more detail on Crunchbase, especially in the later rounds. But I'm just going to go through the example once with AngelList, and you'll be able to extrapolate from that how it works for Crunchbase. So this is a screenshot, right? This is just any old company. I'm not endorsing NextForce technology, but this is an AngelList page, and you should have an AngelList page, and it should be fairly well built out. Different screenshots or videos, the amount that you're fundraising, the short description, and more information below that you can look at yourself. I would keep this updated in parallel with your GUST profile, because one of the first things investors will do is they will come to this page. I go to this page even before I go to the website in many cases, because I find that this is a more succinct description of the company than what's on their website, believe it or not. Now, the part of this page that you want is a little further down the page. So if you scroll down, it talks about their current round. And it says there at the bottom, the investors in this round, as well as other investors. I mean, don't worry about the distinction between syndicate investors or other investors. But what you really want to understand is who's investing in this comparable company at the comparable stage. Now you can make a note of all these guys. You'll, personally, I like doing it in Excel. Though if you know SQL, this process actually lends itself considerably better to a SQL database. But either way, and I'll give you some concrete examples in a moment. You want to start recording all the investors that are showing up on your search through AngelList. Once you click through to an individual investor, this is what it looks like. And again, I don't know this guy. I'm not even sure how to pronounce his name. But the important thing is you get a sense of where, what he's done. In this case, he's incredibly active with 70 plus investments. In some cases, they'll include in their little title description how many deals they do a year and roughly how much they put in there. But it's really whatever they want to do there. And you can then just scroll down the page and you can start seeing not only where they work, but all the companies that they have at least listed on AngelList that they've invested in. So that's where you find other comparable companies to continue this iterative process. Now, I should probably say this, even though I think it's blindingly obvious. If you find a company that is your direct competitor, you probably don't want to solicit those investors. So you should also be keeping a kind of blacklist of companies, at least of investors who you don't want to reach out to, because there's a fairly good chance that whatever you tell them will make it directly into the hands of your direct competition. Now, that doesn't mean that this is not meaningful, because you can then look at those same investors' other investments to get other comparable companies. So you can continue the iterative process, but you just want to basically blackball those investors as far as your outreach process is concerned. Now, what did I say? 50 to 100 investors. So keep going until you've got 50 to 100 investors. And, this is how I would record it if I were in, if I were using Excel, just the name of the investors, the number of companies, comparable companies that they've invested in. So I'm not talking about every investment they've made, just the ones that are in marketplaces and health tech, to use the prior example. And then I also like to keep track of the companies that they're actually in, because ultimately when I reach out to them, I'm going to reference those companies. Since you've invested in these, company A, B, and C, you're probably, good chance you'll be interested in my company. So it's important to capture that information while you do this. Otherwise, you're going to have to go back and get it later. Now, you've noticed the A, B, and Cs. So what I generally do is when you rank that Excel spreadsheet based on the number of hits, I break the list into roughly thirds. The top third, those are your A-list investors. Those are the guys that they invest a lot and in your sector frequently. They're your hottest prospects. Way at the bottom of the list, you got guys who've done 1 or 2 investments in your area. They might not really understand your space. They might have gotten into the space for other reasons. It could be their nephew's company, or they could have been burnt and they never invested again. So they're not very useful to you. They're kind of, if all else fails, you can try them. And then the guys in the middle are guys that are active enough in your space that they know what they're talking about, and they're not super active. Like, they don't just throw checks around like there's no tomorrow, but there's enough of it there that it's worth your time. And I always tell people to pitch the B list first, and the reason for that should be somewhat obvious, right? As you go out there on the road, your first couple of pitches are going to be a little rough. You're going to incorporate the feedback that you get from the investors into your future pitches. You don't want to screw up an A prospect, right? You go in there with like a deck that's not perfect, or a pitch that still needs work, and they say, "Oh, we're going to pass." That's kind of a big loss. But you can pitch a B-list investor, and their response is valid because they do enough business in your space. But if you mess it up, it ain't the end of the world. And I wouldn't recommend practicing on the C list, because they probably just don't know your space well enough to, for their comments to really be valuable. So LinkedIn, I call this your new next best friend. Believe it or not, I am old enough to remember what life was like before LinkedIn and before AngelList. Prospecting for investors was a lot harder before these 2 tools. Let me tell you how you actually use LinkedIn to supplement this prospecting process. So by now you have that list that I showed you before of all the investors that you want to contact, the other companies they're in. Now what you're trying to figure out is, who do you know who can give you a warm introduction to that investor? So there's a screenshot here. It's very, very simple. This works equally well for individual angel investors as it does for VC funds. So you type the name of the investor or the fund into the search bar, and it'll tell you exactly, who you have second-degree connections to, or first-degree connections in some cases. Obviously, if it's a first-degree connection, you just reach out to them directly. They know you already. But for the second-degree connections, you want to find out who is your connector. And this part of the page on the screen, it's a little bit further down the page when you get to an individual. Actually, since you can modify your profile to put different sections, different places. It's not always in the same place, but it's almost always there. So keep scrolling down. Now you look at these guys and you're going to say, well, okay, Tristan, where the fuck did I meet him? I can't remember. Probably a conference 5 years ago. So he's not really a good person to reach out for, because he doesn't know you well enough to vouch for you, right? And you don't know him well enough to know if he will. So I wouldn't count him. But meanwhile, you can look at some of the other guys like Chris Frelick. Wow, he's a partner at First Round. He's very, very, very well respected. If he knows your business well enough to vouch for you, he's a good person to make a referral. Now, as an aside, asking VCs to make warm introductions for you can be a little risky if they're not investing in your fund, right? Because then the person they introduce you to, we'll say, hey, Chris, are you investing in them? And they'll say no. And they'll say, well, why are you referring them to me if you're not investing? So that really only works if there's a legitimate reason. So if it's an A round investor and you're raising a seed round, and then they'll say, listen, I have my eye on these guys. I'm interested, but they're just too soon for me. But I know you invest earlier. So that kind of introduction from an investor is okay. Similarly, if the investor says, listen, my mandate is to invest in health tech. This is an ed tech company. If I invested in ed tech, I might invest in them, but it's not my mandate. So that also could be a valid introduction. But just a note of caution about using investors to make introductions to other investors if they haven't actually invested in you. But again, the most important thing here, the key takeaway here, is the people that you're looking for are people who know you well enough that they're willing to say, yes, this guy is solid, you should meet with him. Now, once you've made once you've looked at this list of different people, there are actually different kinds of connectors. And I break them up into 3 different buckets. They're the people that you can ask for unlimited introductions. I mean, you're looking at one of them now. Anyone in Dreamit owes you unlimited introductions. Your other investors, by and large, should be willing to make unlimited introductions. Your best friend from college, your uncle, right? All these people will make as many warm introductions as you ask them to, as long as they are, bona fide warm introductions, right? And the reason is they love you and they're invested in you. So they have every reason to do so. On the other end of the spectrum, there are people who, them, but you know that they are incredibly busy. They don't have a lot of patience for introductions, and that's just not their thing for whatever reason. So you can't really use them, even if you know them well and they know you well enough. Or at the very least, they are a absolute last resort. No one else can give you this introduction. And then most of the people fall into the middle bunch, which is kind of used sparingly. If I were just, a friend or an acquaintance of yours and not one of the managing directors in Dreamit, and you were asking me for an introduction, you ask me one introduction and you make it pretty easy, no problem. I get that out right away. You ask me another, 2 or 3, still probably not a problem. Once you start getting into like 5 or 10 introductions, it's like, dude, enough already, right? I got to get my own work done. So you want to use those, the kind of middle type of warm intros a little sparingly. So what I like to do is when I'm going through my list a second time to capture the people who can make warm introductions, I like to kind of balance out how many of the middle category, how many requests I make of them. And this is what it looks like. This is the same spreadsheet you saw before with a couple of extra columns. And I broke them out, columns D, E, and F are my warm connections based on, who I can ask how many times. So, your process is very simple, right? You go through them all and you ask all the unlimited introduction people to make their introductions. And then for the remaining investors that you can't get to using unlimited introductions, you kind of share the love among the as needed people so that no one ends up overly burdened with requests. So now, you might think, okay, I'm going to do this. Every time I get a new investor, I'll jump over to LinkedIn. I'll start asking for, introductions. But I'm going to tell you not to do that, right? You want to do this all in one massive burst. So make your list of comparable companies and potential investors first, then flesh out all your possible warm connections, and then bang out those emails all in one, multi-hour marathon. And the reason for this is, when you're actually trying to get deals to close, the main thing that gets people to go from I'm interested, keep me posted, to I'm interested, where do I write the check out to, is fear of missing out. So if you only have a couple other irons in the fire at the same point, they're not feeling any pressure. But if they know that you got 50 people that you're talking to and a good number of them are interested, then they're more likely to actually, write that check to you. So you're more likely to get to the finish line if you're sprinting rather than, in it for a long haul. Now, the number one thing you want to get to when you ask for a warm intro is a quick yes or no, right? A yes, I'll do it is the best, but a quick no beats radio silence any day, because then you can reach out to the next person on your list and ask that person for a warm intro. And by the way, there's lots of reasons why someone might say no. They might, just like everybody in your LinkedIn profile isn't a close personal friend of yours, some of the people they're linked to, they might not know that well. Of course, they also might not love you, which is a different story, but we'll get to how you can kind of souse that out and move on. Also, it's on you to follow up with these people. So every 4 to 7 business days, depending on how aggressive you want to be, if someone hasn't gotten back to you, you want to reach back out to them. So, hey, Chris, were you ever able to reach out to John from Meta Adventures about, introducing me to them? Oh, just checking in with you. Have you heard back from them? Now, there are a couple of different things that can happen there. They might have sent the intro already and they haven't heard back. It's not on them to track that. They're doing you a favor. They might have meant to send the intro and never did, or they may still be waiting to hear back from the ultimate target, in which case your reminder will prompt them to also follow up. And if you get total radio silence from one of the people you've asked for a warm intro, and after following up 4 days later, still nothing, it's now 8 business days later and you haven't heard anything, just move on, right? Just move on and ask somebody else for the intro. You generally don't want to ask too many people for the same intro. And the reason is, every time you ask, that's a little bit of credit you're asking for. It's a favor you're asking for. So you don't want to burn those favors unnecessarily. But, when you need them, use them, right? Now, I've had situations where I thought, these guys aren't answering me, right? So I moved on to the next one. In fact, one situation, I went down to like 7 or 8 different people asking for a warm intro. And entirely by chance, I got 2 introductions from 2 different people who I'd asked, who'd been silent for over a week or 2. And they both came in within 45 minutes of each other. That ain't the end of the world, right? So the target now thinks, wow, both of these people think I should talk to Andrew. I should really talk to him. So that's not a bad thing, except that I burned, a lot. I annoyed 8 people to get the 1 intro. Okay, so there's a couple of questions here which I'll pause to bring in there. One of the questions was whether or not I've used Unicorn, which is a new app for fundraising. And ironically, I just got an outreach email from them yesterday. They are iPhone only, so I've never actually played with them myself. I asked the founder, hey, what's the difference between you and AngelList? And he gave me an answer, which if he were one of my startups, I'd have banged back against that in partner meetings. It wasn't entirely clear. So to the short answer is, I've been introduced to the Unicorn app. I haven't played with it yet. So stay tuned, and I may have more information on that in a couple of days. The next question was also about what we should use for LinkedIn workflow for the intro or the connector to intro via email. So I'm not entirely sure I got the question, but I think that's a constellation of questions, which is one, do I send email versus regular mail? I always send regular email. Remember, these are warm connections for me. So if I actually have a connection to this person, I probably already have their email address. If I don't, if you're a first degree connection with somebody, there is in the lower right-hand corner of the top part of their profile, a button for contact info, and that's usually got their email address, and often has their personal email address rather than work. I've just noticed that for LinkedIn, people tend to keep their personal email address there rather than work, because work changes. Now, as for actually managing who's responded or not responded to an intro request email, I personally use Boomerang. It's a plugin for Gmail that will tell me if an email hasn't been answered within a certain period of time. But you can use the same thing that you use for your sales pipeline, which could be Pipeline, it could be Streak. I know some of the teams have used Trello for it. So whatever it is, in the bad old days, I used to just set up reminders on my on my calendar at 9 a.m. every morning. I just has so and so responded yet? Boomerang's a lot easier. So let's move right along. So you've all heard the art of the breaking through via email. pitch, or otherwise known as being an email ninja. If you haven't, go back into the content channel on Slack and find that deck or the link to the presentation and watch it again, right? This is where those skills are going to be tested. I want to give you a very, very, very quick overview. So number one, you want to connect on LinkedIn first, right? If you're doing a cold outreach, worst case scenario, LinkedIn is a touch point just like anything else. So you send them a very short, you connect, you customize the I want to connect email, really just the core of what you're going to say. Or it might be a follow-up. Hey, I met you at the conference 2 weeks ago. I'm going to follow up with you via email in more detail. But you do that contact, that LinkedIn connection. You can also do a Twitter follow because that's another little ping that puts you on their radar. I would not friend them on Facebook. That's a little not so businessy, so it's a little stalkerish. When you actually send that email out, whether it's to the ultimate prospect or to someone that you're asking for a warm intro, the subject line has to be clear and killer, right? It's got to be something where they know right away what you want, and they know that they can bang it out right away and get it out of their inbox. Those are the emails that get opened and dealt with first. You also want the email itself to be short, forwardable, and scannable. And what I mean by that is if it's long, it goes into the I'll read it later bucket, which never happens for a lot of people. If I can't just hit forward and I've got to go type something out on my own, I have to think about it, it goes into the I'll do it later. If I can't just by glancing at it get a sense of what the email's about, it goes into, okay, unread it, and I'm going to go do it later. And doing it later, that's a bad thing. So we want to avoid that. Now, the other trick here, which I don't think was covered in Email Ninja in this context, is you want to give people an easy out. So what I mean by that is it's getting to that quick no. So let's say the person that you're reaching out to doesn't really know the ultimate contact that well. Or let's say he actually doesn't like your business. He might like you personally, but he has got reservations about your business. And he doesn't want to expend his social credit by referring you to one of his business contacts who will then assume that he likes what you're doing. And that makes him look bad for sending someone that's not really up to snuff to this guy. So what some people will do, I'm kind of a dick about it. I'll just say, hey, I can't do it. I don't know that guy very well. Or I'll say respectfully, I don't think, you made enough progress to talk to so-and-so. But other people are kind of averse to confrontation. So they'll be passive about it. They'll just let it disappear and hope you don't remember to follow up, which, number one, you're not going to do. You will follow up within 4 to 7 business days. But the way I give people an easy out is I usually end my email with, do you know so-and-so well enough to introduce? And that gives them an easy out. They can just say, oh, yeah, I met him a couple of years ago at a conference. Or, yeah, I know him, but I don't really know what his investment focus is. Or, yeah, I know him, but it's not the super warmest intro. If you know someone else, you might want to ask them first. And that's their way of saying, don't count on me. But you want to give them that out, because then they'll respond. It's an easier out than just ignoring it and hoping you don't come back. And it's certainly an easier out when you remind them in 4 days that you're still waiting. And again, like I mentioned before, you want to use tools like Boomerang or Streak or Pipeline to make sure that when that 4-day period or 7-day period is elapsed, you're actually following up with them. I want to cycle back to one thing I mentioned before. So you are actually, you have in that Excel spreadsheet or in that SQL database, you've got the list of all the other companies that they've invested in that are relevant to you. So when you're composing your 2 or 3 line email, you can actually use that information. So right, your email might read something like this. Hey, Andrew, as you know, I'm working on company X. I'm working on XYZ. Right? Repeat it in a way that I can just hit forward. So it's not something I need to retype. It looks like you're connected to Chris. I think Chris would be interested in my company because he's invested in similar companies such as A, B, and C. See where that data comes in. And then you end with, do you know Chris well enough to introduce? And that's the easy out. And that's 3 sentences. And you can modify that kind of 3-sentence formula if you're talking about sales prospects, or pretty much anything else out there. But for the investor introductions, the middle sentence is usually why that person wants to invest in your company. And the answer is most of the time because they've invested in other companies in the same sector. So let me do a quick recap, and then we're going to open up the floor to questions. So number one, 50 to 100 prospects. If you don't have 50 to 100 prospects on your list before you go out there, your process will most likely stall. Number two, use AngelList or for Crunchbase to do that iterative search for these prospective investors. Use LinkedIn to find the people who can give you warm introductions to those investors. Reach out to your B list first, right? Because you don't want to screw it up when it's an A-list investor. Number, I think it's 6, is leverage your unlimited connectors first, and then share the love among all the other people who are, maybe as needed. 7, make the intros as easy as possible. And then finally, do whatever you can to get to a quick yes or no. That's all I got. Let me leave this screen up, and I see we've got Rich here, probably because I didn't answer his question adequately. What do you got for me, Rich?
Go off mute. There we go. Yeah, let me just ask it a little different way. I think you started to get into it there at the end before the last slide, Andrew, but what I was saying was, if you go to LinkedIn and find somebody that you'd like to be introduced to, and you scroll down on the right-hand side, about halfway down, it'll say how you're connected to that person. Yeah. If you're the person that's connected to them, I can use a little link right there that says, have Andrew make an introduction for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's
you like that workflow. And
I don't like that. I don't like that. It's for the same reason I don't like InMail. So this is partly personal preference, so take it with a grain of salt. But the biggest thing that I hate about InMail is that when you respond, your email trail is not there.
Oh, okay.
Right? Plus, if you're using the ask for, request a connection through LinkedIn, it's harder for you to track, depending on what tools you're using, whether or not that person's responded. So there are a couple of risks there. Number one, you don't know what email address LinkedIn is using, right? Could be going to an old work address and it's bounced. They may get a notification, but not, believe it or not everyone has the app on their phone. So it's a little bit more risky. You can't control you don't have enough information about where it's going. And number two, depending on the tool, like Streak and Boomerang, and I'm not sure about Pipeline, but I think also integrate with Gmail. Right. They don't integrate with LinkedIn. So you would have to then manually make another step of recording that you've reached out to so-and-so and set that 4 to 7 day timer. How do I do? Was that the question?
Yeah, I got it. That was a question. And just a quick comment, excuse me. I think that founder of Unicorn App scammed us all, because I got an email from him right around the same time you did. Didn't even know about anything about who they were. I did a quick little search, found the app. The app was not easy to find on the iOS store.
Yeah.
Because there's a million unicorns. But I haven't played with it yet either. I just thought maybe you might know about it.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right there. I mean, one of the tricks that we've been teaching you is how to make even a cold email like that look personal. And his was actually not bad, right? Visually it looked like it could have been sent directly from him. When you check the header information, it actually had his email address. It wasn't like something.contactually.com or .intercom.io. So it was pretty good that way. And when I did email him back, he responded within pretty much a few minutes. So it was a pretty well executed campaign. And if you weren't a cynical SOB like I am, like you're becoming, Rich, you wouldn't have identified it as being anything other than kind of one-on-one. Okay, Rich, I'm going to send you back. We're going to bring Joey forward.
So thanks for all the great information about how to find the best connection and get connected to an investor through some mutual connection. And you touched on it for a quick second, but in the situation where you find a great investor that's invested in your space, similar companies that aren't direct competitors, but you look on LinkedIn and you're maybe a third connection, you don't have anyone to introduce you, what do you do in that case?
Sure. So number one, that should be exceedingly rare. If you are connected to everybody in Dreamit, right? By the way, you are all connected to everyone in Dreamit. I don't mean just me and Phil. I mean Steve Barsh. I mean Mo. I mean Mike. I mean David Bookspan, Mike Levinson, Steve Welsh, the three founders. I mean Avi.
Yeah, that was in that checklist before.
Everybody. Yeah. Joey, I love you. You actually read the checklist. I'm willing to bet you that at least a third of the other people on there are kind of saying, oh, fuck, I forgot to do that. So number one, if you are linked to everybody, the odds are you're going to get a second degree connection and possibly even multiple ones of them. I'm going to bring down the screen share, stop screen sharing just so, I can be a little bit more personal here. So that's number one. Number two, once you've, let's say you really don't. Like, let's say there's somebody who they're very active in the space. It's a little bit more of a niche, or they keep a very low profile, or in some cases, they choose not to link on LinkedIn. There's some people who are very privacy centric there. The first thing I would do is I would ask. I would ask the other partners and directors, because in the case, if it's the latter case where they just don't link, they just don't want to be found that way. Most investors are the opposite, right? Most VCs and angel investors are about the easiest people on the face of the earth to network to. It's our job. We don't get deal flow any other way. But some of the more some of the more strategic investors, right? They might keep a lower profile. So when you get to that, you got a couple of options. Number one, you can just work around, because as part of your outreach, you meet somebody else, you got a good rapport, they want to invest in you, you've linked to them, the odds that you're linked to them go up. So that's another option. Another option beyond that is at some point you do a cold outreach, right? It happens. You can do it. You just need to be a ninja about it, right? I would wait. Ideally, you've got some other news that makes it compelling, right? I just got my lead investor. I've been tracking you for a long time. You would be the ultimate strategic investor to the round. I apologize for the cold outreach, but things are moving very fast, and I really want you in.
Sure. All right. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, and if you suspect that they're kind of that reclusive investor, then one of the things you can do is you can go into the intermediate connections that you have, and as you go through them, some of them will jump out at you as like, this guy really should know the target, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're both VCs in the same city. They should know each other. And then you can actually ask those guys, hey, I don't see you're connected to the guy, but I feel like you must be.
Any chance you happen to know?
Any chance you happen to be that, but it's just not on LinkedIn.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
You can actually try that before the cold call.
Avoid the cold outreach as much as you can.
Yeah, you're just it's the warm one is the best way to get yourself to the top of somebody's attention.
Yeah, for sure. All right, thanks.
Cool. We got a little bit more time. Some of the other couple questions that you might want to ask are, my company is doing X. I need to get in touch with certain types of investors. That's a fair question for right now. You could talk about specific experiences that you've had as you've reached out that have kind of thrown you a curveball you haven't known how to handle. Ask me anything. But we'll start with Marshall.
Hey, Andrew, thank you very much for taking my question. For me, it's a little less about prospecting investors and more for, do you think that certain industries lend themselves more to angel versus seed rounds? We're definitely on the earlier side, and in the education space, do you think there are certain types of investors that are much better than others?
So that is true, but it's less, but for both the guys in health and education, for you guys, it's less of an issue, right? So the companies that tend to be very capital intensive, like pure pharma companies, like we are coming out with a new drug that I don't know makes you grow 2 inches, and for the record, I meant like real height. That wasn't or we're creating like Via, for instance. They own their own cars, right? That's incredibly capital intensive. So something where you can't get to that MVP without $10 million or more is not very angel friendly. Now, we don't take those companies into Dreamit by and large, because we just can't service you as well. Even if you're a post-seed company whose next round may be $5 or $10 million, started out the other way. So really, you have to think of in terms of how much are you raising, and where does that put you? If you're raising $1 million, $1.5 million, and you could have a couple of bigger angels writing 200K checks to lead it, and maybe a bunch of like smaller guys writing 50s and 25s. You do it all through angels, or there's a seed fund or an angel fund. They put in like 400 and lead you around. That works too. When you get into raising like $3, $4, $5 million, the lead investor really has to write a check of $1 million or more, and there are very few angels that can swing that big.
Got you. And more of as a follow-up, even if it is in the, let's say, below 750,000 range, is there a tangible benefit to taking that as a lump from one, let's say, seed fund? Or do you think?
Very good question. Very good question. So there's two pieces to that question. So number one is, are there certain investors that are far more valuable than others? And then the second is, what's the right number, the optimal number of investors in a round? And the answer to both those questions stems from the same basic elements. So investors bring a couple things to the table, and cash is the lowest common denominator, right? That's the least they bring to the table. Some successful optometrist in Cleveland wants to give you 25 grand. That's all he's got for you. In your personal case, maybe his kid goes to private school. He can make one introduction, right? Now, for most angel investors who are at all active in the space, they have more connections to bring to the table, especially if they made their money in the tech world as opposed to real estate.
Whatever.
Fairly good advice for you and a good Rolodex for you. And as you move upstream to actual VC funds who have their own LPs as investors, as limited partners, sometimes they'll say, well, we'll only write a check for $250,000, but I know two of my LPs would love what you're doing. I'm going to bring them in, and that makes them look good, and it makes your job a lot easier. And as you get kind of more on the institutional side, the signaling factor of having an actual fund, all other things being equal, goes up. There are certain angels that have that signaling factor, and there's certain funds that are like, who are they? But by and large, all other things being equal, having a lead investor who's a fund with a good reputation is big. Now, could you do it with one fund? So the plus of that is you did it all with one fund. You're done, go home, go back to work. The con is you're getting one investor's or one fund's set of contacts to leverage and experiences to call upon. So if they really love you, right, and they just want to back the truck up and throw money at you, they may want the entire round. And if you get that from multiple people and you can get a little bidding war going on with your term sheet, you're sitting pretty. If you can get two of those guys to play well together, it's even better. And in some cases, you might say, I'm raising 750. They'll say, we love you. We want to take all of it. And then you've got maybe, two other angel investors who would be very strategic for you. And you might say to your VC, listen, these two guys are super strategic for us. Can I give you 650 out of the 750 and give them 50 each just to bring them in? And for that, it's probably, if they are super strategic that way, they'll say, okay, we took a little step back. It didn't really change the economics for our fund. And now we've got those two other guys hooked in, and they will meaningfully increase the odds of your success. Sure. But each fund is different. And there are pigs in every industry. So maybe the short answer is, if that happens, it's a good problem to have, and talk to us. Cool. Okay, we got a few more minutes if anyone else wants to come forward. For those of you paying very close attention, yes, that's the same wall that Joey was in front of. They are like 3 feet away from each other. That's okay. It's not one question per team. If different people have different questions, that's cool too. While we're waiting, I'm going to go through I'm just going to check if any chat stuff were sent to me. And no, we're good. So I give it another 2 minutes. If no one else comes up with questions that they want, that means I've answered all your questions. I'm better than I thought I was. And you guys will all have no problems raising money. Right. Okay. Silence means yes. Okay, let me repeat this for you. Guys, if you know someone who did not make it, it might be one of your teammates, even if they're not the primary person involved in building the prospect list, I strongly urge them to either read the deck or get the link to this video so that they understand the process. Number 2, think about how this applies to your company. If you have not already done so, start working on the list. In an ideal world, you are coming to the next partner meeting with your prospect list. And that's useful for 2 reasons. Number 1, you need the damn list, right? And you're going to start, as soon as possible. But it's also valuable because if there are people on that list that for whatever reason we have not yet added to the roadshow or have not offered investor office hours to, share it with us and we can see if we can get them in. Because odds are if they're interested in your company, they're probably interested in a handful of other companies within your track. And if there's someone we don't know yet, it's our job to get to know them and bring them in. So definitely have that ready as soon as possible. Cool. I heard the Jeopardy theme. I think that means that our time is up. Doug, is that your way of saying we're good to go?
Thank you very much. We're good.
Fantastic. Okay, everybody. I'm going to be back in the office in about 45 minutes. I'll see everybody there. Oh, wait. That's Brad. You're very welcome. Cool. I'll see you all soon, either virtually or in person. For now,